What's up, Internet? You're tuned into a very special episode 128 of the FlipScreen Games Podcast, a weekly video game podcast where two best buds from different nations come together to discuss the wide world of video games. I'm your host, Pete and Bessie, joined as always by my very good friend and co-host, Mr. Steven Radford.
Hello, hello.
Hello, Steve. So this is a special one for a couple reasons. It's our second episode of the week. It's the reaction to the major Xbox podcast, and I'm in a hotel room, and I'm very tired. Let's kill it. You ready?
I'm ready.
All right, let's not bury the lead here because there's a lot of news to get through today. Of course, Xbox head, the team of the head of the Xbox games team is, I guess, what you call them.
It's
I don't
the
know.
CEO of Xbox, is that his name, all right?
Well, yeah, but then it's the other guys too. We got Phil Spencer, we got Matt Booty, we got Sarah Bond. You know,
okay.
The team, right? So
The
that Xbox leadership all came on to the official Xbox podcast, and had quite a bit of news to talk about. I think depending on how dialed in you are to the news, there was a lot of people who were like, there was no new information here. And we forget that most of what we learned was from leaks. So this was the official confirmation of much of that news. But there were a couple really juicy new things as well. So to give you just a quick breakdown of what happened and what we're going to be talking about, we have 4 Xbox games, formerly Xbox exclusive games, that are confirmed to be coming to other consoles. We don't know what those games are, but with a little bit of sleuthing, looking at some other sources, I think we know what they are. They just haven't been confirmed. We'll talk about all of that in a second. We also got confirmation on some of their plans for future games being brought multi-platform, some of their plans for Activision Blizzard games finally coming to Game Pass, as well as kind of the future of Game Pass and their exclusive strategy and how that plays into it. And then a tease of next-gen hardware and kind of a very broad statement about what the future of Xbox is moving forward and how fan reaction and some of those things will play into that. So I think let's start with the game stuff, because it's I think the thing everybody has been talking about. We talked about it last week on the podcast. And I think getting to hear it from the horse's mouth is probably a good place to start. So Phil Spencer said, right, that we have 4 games that are confirmed to be coming. He said that there's no promise of additional exclusives becoming multi-platform after that. And he said specifically, not everything is going to be going multi-platform, and said that it is. And I pulled a few specific quotes so you can hear exactly what he said, not paraphrase, right? He said that it is, quote, not a change to our fundamental exclusive strategy. That they are, quote, making these decisions for specific reasons. So the games that were chosen for specific reasons. And then he gave some insight into that we'll get into in a minute. And he said that every decision that they make is, quote, made with, quote, the long-term health of Xbox in mind. And what he says that is the platform growing, their games selling, and Xbox being an attractive place for dynamic creative developers to come and make games, right? And he said that they specifically want to be able to, quote, use what some of the other platforms have to grow our franchises. And there was a lot of conversation around that, right? That the games that were chosen for a specific reason, and that it was a strategic opportunity to kind of strengthen the Xbox brand and, you know, like get these games in front of new people for reasons that correspond to what the games are.
Well, it was weird because he wouldn't say initially on the podcast, like he was quizzed, and the host was trying to figure out what games they were going to be, and he said, we're not going to reveal that. We've got the teams have launch plans for those games, and I don't want to kind of steal their spotlight, but that it would make sense when you found out what the games were.
Right.
And then later went into the criteria of what it was to choose the 4 titles. I'm curious though as to what he means by what other platforms can bring to those games. One of the titles makes sense to me. The other 3, I think, less so.
I think they make sense to me when you listen to the full context of what he said, and then you also read the interview that he did with The Verge after the fact. I think it sheds some light on a few things. So we'll jump around a little bit here, right? I want to kind of jump in and out between some of the Verge stories and stuff to give you guys context as I think it's appropriate. So like you said, right? Phil, weirdly, I think, would not confirm what the games are. But if you look at a story that's up by The Verge that we'll have in the description down below, there are sources close to the story that The Verge says has kind of confirmed what those games will be. And it's the games that we've heard rumors about for the last couple weeks, by and large, right? With one notable addition. The first two games are allegedly going to be Hi-Fi Rush and Pentiment. And then the two games that follow that are going to be Sea of Thieves and Grounded, right? So to talk about, and again, Phil did confirm that two of the games were going to be community-driven games, and two of them would be smaller titles. So obviously those games fit that criteria. Then to talk about why those games were chosen, he said that they had kind of two ways they were looking at it, right? He said that his fundamental belief is that console exclusives will be a smaller and smaller part of the industry going forward over the next decade, and that even though this doesn't represent a fundamental change to their plans today, in terms of how they handle exclusives, that it'll still be this kind of case-by-case thing where there are opportunities for a game to grow by being non-exclusive. And I think he kind of laid out what he believes those criteria are that make sense and when a game would be considered to come to other platforms. He said that first off, it would be a game that's over a year old. It would have already been on Xbox and PC for a while. He said that the community-driven games, he said that they were, quote, first iterations of a franchise that have reached their max potential on Xbox and PC. And then he said that they are games that they, quote, obviously want to continue to invest in. And then this is paraphrasing, but he said that growing those audiences on other platforms helps support the future of either that game itself or a sequel, right? Or investing in that IP further by helping to keep the game healthy and bringing new players in. And obviously, new streams of revenue. And then when he was talking about the smaller games, he said that they are, quote, smaller games that were never really meant to be built as platform exclusives. And he said that these games are games that are smaller teams that smaller games that their teams really wanted to make. And again, I'm paraphrasing what he said here. This isn't a direct quote. That they wanted to support those ideas, right? And they wanted to support their creativity in making a passion project. And that selling those games on other platforms allows them to maximize the financial return on those projects. And then either, hopefully, ideally, right, maybe allow for investment. And this is a direct quote. Maybe allow for investment into future iterations of those. And then he went on to qualify that could mean either sequels or similar titles in that vein, right? So that could mean like a Pentiment 2, or it could mean another game in like the style of Pentiment that's a new IP, right? Something like that, just for sake of example. And his argument there is he believes that there's value for the Xbox brand for them to expose players on other platforms to these games, because it kind of strengthens what Xbox means in their mind, right? Maybe you're a PlayStation gamer, you don't think about the games that are on Xbox, and you get this game that came to PlayStation, and then you maybe think about picking up an Xbox and getting those games day and date rather than having to wait for them to maybe come to PlayStation or Nintendo or whatever, right? They did talk a little bit about how they would consider other games moving forward, but I kind of want to put a pin in that for right now, because I'm interested in what you just said, right? You said you think for at least one of the games you said you thought it made a lot of sense, and the other ones you weren't as sure. Expound on that.
Well, I think Sea of Thieves makes a lot of sense. It's a games as a service game. It's very community driven. It needs
fully mature,
players.
right? It's been around for years.
So it makes sense to bring that over in the same way that they already have, say, Elder Scrolls Online on PlayStation. I don't think it really makes sense to keep these kind of multiplayer games locked down to a single platform. PlayStation's spoken about that. Just this week, Hiroki Totoki was talking about how they might need to explore multi-platform, and I think for multiplayer games that makes sense. Obviously, Bungie was already doing that with
look
Destiny.
at Helldivers, right?
Yeah,
Helldivers
Helldivers
was really good release on PC.
Day and date on PC and PlayStation, the first game. I could see that expanding to Xbox in the future. They obviously already have MLB The Show on Xbox due to contractual obligations. So they're already working with Xbox in that regard. I think the other titles, Hi-Fi Rush and Pentiment, make sense for, say, a handheld. They are very much, they would feel very much at home on Switch. I think you said you didn't understand why Phil didn't want to announce the games. I think those two games are going to be in a Nintendo Direct very, very soon. And so,
Probably. That's a good
um,
point.
and so to announce them here and take that thunder away, they may also have like some kind of contract in place with Nintendo to say that we're going to announce that during the Direct. So that wouldn't be possible. So I think those two games we're probably going to hear about pretty soon. With Grounded, I think Grounded is really kind of the outlier for me. I don't think that got the
Really?
traction that it was expected to have. I
I mean,
think that,
I think that's why you bring it multi-platform, though, right?
yeah.
Is like, because I think there's an argument to be made, right, that like it probably didn't connect the way that they wanted it to, or it
Mm-hmm.
hasn't broken out the way that they wanted it to yet. And getting it in front of more players just like gives you the opportunity to find a community for it, right? And
Yeah.
like maybe it never is a breakout hit, but maybe you can get enough people between Xbox, PC, PlayStation, and then, you know, maybe Switch or the successor to the Nintendo Switch, to either keep it going or to prove that it's definitely DOA and you should shut it down, right?
Yeah, that was the one that I was surprised by, because it's not been a game that it's really been on everyone's lips. Like Hi-Fi Rush and Pentiment were big games in the
Yeah.
last couple of years. People were really excited about them.
I think it's
They were fresh, they
I
were
think it's
new.
probably the opposite thing, right? Whereas
Yeah,
like I think for, you know, he said, right, like the opportunity is either it's a game that has reached its maximum potential and you want to keep bringing new players into it like Sea of Thieves, or it's a game that struggled to connect or didn't meet expectations. And like I think maybe Grounded kind of fits both of those criteria. Like it's a game as a service, and obviously having more people playing it is good, but I think it does kind of maybe arguably have the broader problem of just like not connecting with the market the way that you wanted it to, not having a dedicated install base for a long period of time. And, you know, maybe having a 1.0 release on
hmm,
PlayStation or something like that would help, because who knows? Maybe a lot of people played it in early access and then never went back to it. And like that's part of the problem. I don't know. But obviously getting it in front of more players is the best opportunity for them to like see if it's an idea that is worth continuing to
yeah,
invest in, or
definitely.
whether it's something that they should just cut their losses on at this point. Because, you know, I mean, look at all the other stuff that Oblivion has going on. That's good.
Hmm. One thing that was asked in both the podcast and I know also with Tom Warren's interview over at The Verge, was the rumor of Starfield and Indiana Jones, because I think that was the reason this podcast was like pushed out pretty rapidly
Yeah.
in this way that they're talking about the Xbox business,
Yeah, I
because
think they wanted to put
people,
the fire out, right?
yeah, people were really worried about both of those titles. Whether they were considered, I'd imagine they probably were in discussion, and they probably were decided that they don't meet the four criteria because they're not a year. You know, they're obviously not going to be a year old. Starfield might be after the next expansion, after the first expansion comes out, but Indiana Jones is going to be a fresh new title for Xbox. If that was to launch on PlayStation day and date, it would kind of I think interrupt the Xbox brand in a way that they don't want to. So it was nice to hear and that those concerns were assuaged, and Phil Spencer went out of his way to say that he listens to fans and they kind of take all of that stuff on board.
It is interesting though, right? Because you're right. That said, in the follow-up interview with The Verge, right, which is I think clearly the thing less people are going to see,
Mm-hmm.
he did say that it's not off the table, right? He said they're not in this initial wave of 4 games. Here's what he specifically said, right? Um, Spencer confirms that Starfield and Indiana Jones are not part of the first 4 games, but he doesn't rule out the possibility for these titles to arrive on PS5 in the future. Quote, I don't think we should, as an industry, ever rule out a game going to any other platform. We're focused on these 4 games and learning from the experience. We don't have work going on other franchises. But for anybody to stand up and say something's never going to happen, I think it feels like creating more certainty in a world of gaming where you really want to respond to what customers want and what our players and creators are looking for. So I'm not saying that you know, he is being disingenuous, but I think that's worded in a very careful way so that
It
if
is, yeah.
plans
That's like
change,
PR speak for me. That's
right?
kind of, I think, because people were calling him out on Twitter last week, saying that he'd said all these things previously about all these games are going to be exclusive, etc., and now
Right,
he's going back on it. That it makes sense now to say that we're not going to rule any specific game out.
right. And again, right, you made the point that these games don't fit that criteria now,
Right.
but
Yeah.
like 2 years from now, or even, like 8 months from now,
Or what
it
if a
would.
platform comes out that makes sense for it, right? What if it doesn't make sense right now on the Switch or on the PS5, but it makes sense further down the line on the Switch too, because it's a
With the
handheld.
PlayStation
Xbox don't have a
6, right?
handheld.
Like,
Yeah, it could fit the criteria then, and to kind
yeah.
of say that it's not going to happen ever, I think would be disingenuous to fans.
And he's setting himself up for another gotcha moment where it's like, well,
Yeah.
you said this. You said it wouldn't happen. And it's like, and it did. It's like, okay, fair enough. So yeah, I definitely see that. They did talk a little bit about kind of like what the future might look like for other titles too, and I think there's some interesting stuff there. I'm going to pull more from the Verge articles that we'll link to down below. But here we go. So not every Xbox game is suddenly going to appear on rival consoles, but Microsoft is clearly considering the potential for more in the future. I asked Spencer whether there will be more multi-platform games, especially if these 4 are successful. And he said, yeah, but we haven't seen that yet. We're obviously one of the biggest publishers on PlayStation and Nintendo today when you think about the Activision Blizzard and Bethesda lineup of games. So we know what it means to ship games on Steam, PlayStation, Nintendo, and Xbox. These are games that originally launched on Xbox. They were Xbox branded games, and we want to see what happens because going and doing the development work to bring them to these new platforms is real work. We want to make sure that the return makes sense. We want to make sure that the audience that's there has an appetite. Maybe they don't. So I think that's interesting to me because I genuinely do believe what he's saying here, where it's like they are going to use these as a test bed and see what happens. I think what's interesting is like some of the games that are not included here, right? Because they talked about why these 4 games make sense. And, we heard rumors last week, right, about that they were considering Gears. They were, obviously Starfield and Indiana Jones were in that conversation. Whether or not that's true or whether or not that was a miscommunication or they were considered and they
Or it
decided
could be that
against
that's
it.
a wave 2. It could be that this is the first wave. If
Right.
this is successful, they'll come out in wave 2. But right now, this is what we're going with, and these are the 4 games. I mean, we don't even
Right.
know if these are the 4 games. These are the rumored 4 games, but
Right.
Phil's not kind of announced any specific one. I think it's pretty clear that it's going to be these. I believe Tom Moran's reporting over at The Verge has always been pretty solid, and he obviously had the exclusive interview with Phil.
Right. Exactly. And then when you add some more context, right, from the Verge article, this is from Tom. I understand that Microsoft has also previously been weighing up the idea of bringing Gears of War, Microsoft Flight Simulator, and even the next Doom game to rival platforms. Final decisions haven't been made on these other games, but there's bound to be more than just 4. As the strategy evolves, it's clear there will be some interesting decisions being made about the future of Xbox games and exclusivity. So I think that's pretty interesting, right? Like the idea that like they're considering those other titles, those arguably bigger titles. That I think is going to be an interesting one because you and I have talked about this a lot, right? Like we've had a lot of disagreements on exclusivity and like how it works and when is the right time to make it not multi-platform, when is the right time. And I think you and I have kind of come to an agreement that like, well, it definitely makes sense with any multiplayer game because you need to maximize player base and microtransactions. So casting as wide a net as possible is obviously the way to go. When you start talking about single player games and those more like marquee legacy titles that hype up and are supposed to be the brand identity and this and that and this and that, I think that's where it gets muddier. And it's interesting to me that none of those games are a part of this experiment, right? And I don't think it means that they won't come, but I think it does speak to them maybe thinking that that's something different.
Yeah, I mean, it could also mean that those games are going to be more difficult than, say, a smaller title like Hi-Fi Rush and Pentiment to port over to another platform.
True.
Something like, the next Doom game, if it's already in development as an exclusive for Xbox, to then go back to them and say, no, make this multi-platform when you're there deep in development of that game, doesn't seem fair to the team. That could be something that can be done afterwards, maybe alongside a DLC release, which was the rumor with Starfield. And something like Microsoft Flight Simulator, that obviously takes advantage of the cloud. I don't know how that can kind of tie in with PlayStation. That's going to be a tricky one as well. But I don't think anything's off the table. But I remember saying to you the thing, I kind of don't think that exclusives need to exist. I think Xbox should compete on hardware. Seems like that might be happening. We'll talk about that a little bit later because it was something that they spoke about in the podcast. At the moment, both of the consoles are very similar. I think if they can do something unique, which is seemingly what they're going to do, then I think you can put your games on both platforms. Maybe they run better on Xbox, but they also come to Game Pass day and date, which was again reiterated in the podcast. And I think that is an important distinction.
And Matt Booty specifically said Game Pass will not come to other consoles. That was something that they made a point of saying, like, hey, this is how we look at it, that these coming to other platforms doesn't hurt Xbox because these games already came out on Xbox. All our new games will always come to Xbox and they will all come to Game Pass day one, day and date. And that is their advantage, right? And that's how they show that, Xbox is a desirable place to play. Because, yeah, maybe you can buy this game on PlayStation, but you're going to pay full price for it and you're going to buy it a year later, right? And, like, I think that's interesting. It speaks to, like, what you and I have talked about with PlayStation strategy on PC. And, like, it doesn't hurt to put a game out that's already kind of seen probably the apex of what it's going to achieve on your hardware on PC, right?
You get another boost from it. It's another marketing push. People that maybe missed out on it first time around then come back to it and they're like, oh, I meant to play that game. It's now on PC, but I can pick it up on PS5 for cheaper anyway, so I'm going to go do that.
Right. And then there was just one other thing I wanted to touch on about kind of the I guess the future of it and the fan reaction, because that's something where I think what the most diehard Xbox people want and what Phil wants seem to be at odds, right? I think you see a lot from the Xbox faithful that all Xbox needs is some great exclusives, and that's what's going to push it over. Like, that's what we thought Starfield would be. That's what they just need a system seller, and that's going to get them in the race. And Phil clearly doesn't feel that way, right? Like, he made that comment about exclusives not being around in the next 10 years. They'll become less and less relevant. And he said specifically that Xbox fan reactions will inform Microsoft's next steps. This is coming back from Tom. I always take the feedback from our most ardent fans very seriously, admits Spencer, who's not sold on the idea of exclusives always helping Xbox console sales. Quote, we know today when people are playing, their affinity for their platform is as much about their friends and where their games library is as it is any kind of one exclusive game. I know there's this fictitious world where people think that one exclusive game kind of kicks off the sales of a platform, but the industry just doesn't really work that way today.
Yeah, I fundamentally believe he's right. People wanted to play Fortnite with friends, and that was the reason that it pushed for the floodgates to open. Yeah, but you look at the best-selling games on every platform, it's always FIFA, Call of Duty.
I don't think that means anything. Like, I think that is such a circular argument that ignores the context of those games. It's like people love to point at the Fortnites and FIFAs of the world. Those games are not. Those are blockbusters. Not every game is a fucking blockbuster. And the idea that because you make your game multi-platform, it's inherently going to be more successful, that's just not true, right? Like, especially on the financial end of things, games being exclusive often pays for them. And the developers make a better return.
I don't think that's the case with first-party games. I don't think spending a quarter of $1 billion on The Last of Us Part 2, like the PlayStation admitted this week that the margins weren't there. They want to improve the margins. They're going to have to expand into multi-platform, or the only other solution is to really make these games cheaper to make or more expensive to buy. And $70 was already a hard push. If you're looking at saying going up to $80, $90, $100 for a game, I think that's really going to be a tough sell.
Yeah, but I think that is a different issue. The idea that games cost too much to make and that the margins aren't there is fine. But like, that ignores like the context of what we were just talking about, right? Like, you can't point to Fortnite and FIFA and these other games that are Herculean mammoth successes and say, see, multi-platform is the reason they make money. No, microtransactions is the reason they make money. I think it's kind of insane that you and Phil seem to agree on this, when I think you can easily point to one Breath of the Wild as a killer app exclusive game that kicked off the sales of a popular platform.
Mm-hmm.
That is a fucking fact. And look at the Wii.
But
right?
I think if Breath of the Wild was on the Wii U,
it was
only on the Wii U, no one would have cared, because I think
but that's because it's a shit console.
Exactly. So I think the hardware needs to be there. They seem to be thinking
I agree with
that
you,
next gen hardware.
Don't you agree that Xbox's hardware is there. I think the difference is if you're a console player and you're like, which one am I going to buy? You buy the one that has the games that you can only play on there.
But the problem is
unless
at the
you want
moment,
Game Pass.
the problem at the moment is both the boxes are the same. The games play the same on both of them. They cost the same on both of them.
So the library's the differentiator. And why do you think
there is no
PlayStation
differentiator?
outsells Xbox? But it does. Spider-Man is a differentiator. That is a differentiator. And like, I don't think it's.
I think it's too late. Phil said multiple times, it's too late. They can't get it back. Exclusives.
I think that's easy to say when you haven't put out a game that's must own. Like, I think that attitude is so defeatist. And like, Phil knows a fucking lot more about the games industry than me. I'm not claiming to sit here and say I know what I'm talking about, and he doesn't. But I think it's crazy to say that when not one of the exclusive games they've put out has been a Game of the Year contender. They have not put out a must-own, must-play game on Xbox. And even if you look at the Starfields of the world or the games that are like the bigger deal, a lot of those games have a huge PC player base. So it's super easy to be like, well, why would I buy an Xbox? I already own a PC. But like, that's not going to be the case inherently for something like if Indiana Jones, right, was like a 10 out of 10 must play and you could only get it on Xbox, I think that would motivate sales to some degree. And maybe you're right that it's not enough and it's never going to push them to number one. I also
don't think it matters to them. Like, if I can play it on PC, why do they care? They're still making the money. It's still essentially.
But then it's like, why do you sell hardware at all? And clearly that's part of their strategy moving forward.
And that's been my argument for a while. It's like they just don't differentiate on hardware. They're not competitive right now. The only real competitive thing they've got going for them is Game Pass. The hardware's the same and it's the same price and it runs the same multi-platform games. And yeah, they don't have something like a Spider-Man, but I mean, even Hiroki Totoki this week said that Spider-Man didn't, their sales were down despite Spider-Man being like this big blockbuster hit. Like, those games aren't selling consoles because I think anyone that kind of wanted to get into this ecosystem probably got in pretty early on. Like, they're saying that now we're moving into the second half of this generation. Like,
which we are, though.
Yeah.
Like, and I think it's crazy that people reacted negatively to that. It's like, we are 4 years into this console's life cycle. What do you mean we're not halfway through? Of course we are.
I think people reacted negatively because it feels like this generation in terms of games has been a bit of a dud. When you compare that to like the PS4 generation and what you got a blockbuster smash hit every single year, and then PlayStation comes out.
That's bullshit. Like, we've had this conversation so many times, Steve. Do I need to pull up the list again? Because there wasn't a blockbuster exclusive every year until 4-5 years into the console, which is exactly where we fucking are.
That is exactly where we are. And PlayStation's just said we're not putting any games out until 2025.
That's not what they said. They said of existing IP.
Existing,
and everybody read that way. And what was the reaction?
And I think that I genuinely
what if there's a new one?
I don't think there will be. I think they're resting on their laurels of we've got third party exclusives.
And maybe that's the truth, but they also did that for the first several years of the PS4 and it was not a problem. And it's like, and I get it, right?
But it's seemingly a problem for them because sales are in decline. They're not where they want them to be. It's not aligning with PS4. The margins aren't hitting what they want.
And again, though, right? Like, it's not aligning with PS4, which is the best-selling console that they've produced, aside from the PS2, which is like through the roof, right? Like, I think most people agree will probably not pass that one because of just how long it sold and all the markets it was in and blah, 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 right? So, like, I hear you, and I'm not saying that that's not a cause for concern or a cause for them to, like, do different things, but it's like, I don't think any of that points to the idea that if Spider-Man was available on Xbox, they'd be fine. That's not it.
No, I don't think so either. But,
AAA games cost too much money to make.
They do, but I do think going multi-platform does help. It obviously is the reason why Xbox is doing it. Like, they're not doing it just because they think this is going to be great for the communities.
No doubt, but again,
they're doing it because they think they can make money because it's going to cost
look at the games
money
that they're doing it with.
Do it.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, it's like if it was just financially motivated, it would be Starfield. I think it is financially motivated, but I believe what Phil's saying that it has more to do with brand. That like Pentiment is a fucking awesome game and not enough people played it. And if it's on PlayStation, more people will play it. Period. And that's only good for the prospect of a Pentiment 2, right? I buy that. That makes a lot of sense to me. In the same reason that it made sense for Cuphead or Ori to come over, because it's like, what do you have to lose, right? Like, if you're going to play on my Xbox, you already did. And if you didn't, you aren't ever going to, right? Those are not necessarily system sellers. Whereas, like, historically, the next Halo, the next this, the next that, like that's supposed to be. And, you know, I don't know. Like, I hear what you're saying. I hear what he's saying. I know you look at the margins for PlayStation games and they're getting thinner and thinner. And I think we are reaching a point where that kind of game development, like, is going to become unsustainable if they don't start making compromises.
Well, you end up
right?
with like two of those type of games in a generation, and you have a
Right.
lot smaller games to fill it out.
Yeah. And maybe that's the case. But even then, it's like, I think the argument that it's like exclusives just don't matter for hardware is like, I mean, then why are you in number 3? Because like Xbox, you have PlayStation beat on services. Xbox Game Pass is a much better service than PS Plus. The online experience on Xbox has kind of always been better than PlayStation, right? I think when you're talking about, you know, on services, on anything other than software, Xbox beats PlayStation in most categories, or it's even.
I think Phil was right, though. The Xbox One sucked. Everyone bought a PS4. They bought their digital libraries there. They didn't want to lose them, so they bought a PS5. I don't know how you get back from that when your hardware's identical. If the new hardware is different and unique and fresh in the same way that the Switch was, there's a reason people bought into the Switch. I don't necessarily think it was just Breath of the Wild. That game was great.
No, that's part of it, though.
The console fucking was awesome, and it was something fresh and something new that we'd never seen.
But if it
before.
didn't have a sick exclusive game, you wouldn't have picked it up, even if it was cool hardware. And I think we know that, right? Like, good hardware is not enough to sell a box.
Being able to play Skyrim on that console was one of the reasons why I picked it up.
Sure, but it's still software based, right? Like it's experiences you want to have there. And my point is, if every experience I can have on Xbox is also on PlayStation, why wouldn't I buy a PlayStation if the hardware is nearly identical and there are games I can play there that I can't play on Xbox?
Yeah.
And
which was what everyone's concern was when these rumors first came out. And my argument then was, if this does happen, the reasoning to get an Xbox is still Game Pass, or it's whatever they do.
Getting their great games when they come out day and date. And I think it's the same argument then, right? Where it's like, it's about being there at launch and everything. And I think, you know, you could make that argument for like, well, if I own a PC, why would I buy a PlayStation if they're bringing all their games over there? It's like, well, you want to play,
I think a lot of
play it when it comes out.
I think a lot of PC players do think that if you're not wrapped up in the FOMO and you don't necessarily care about playing it on day one, a lot of people I think do wait. I often wait to play, you know, like a Ubisoft game, because I know it's going to be like £5 down the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so it's interesting because it's like, I think it's something that I think makes a lot of sense for like some of the stuff that they're like talking about, right? Like wanting to push these other IP forward and trying to get them in front of new people. I think that totally makes a lot of sense. And I guess I do kind of, I don't know. I guess I do wonder, like, what can they do to differentiate themselves and make Xbox more attractive if it's not software based? Because I think I agree that the industry is changing. And also, I think it's been true for as long as there have been video game consoles that what sells them is software.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that is the main reason why anyone would buy a console is software. But I don't know. I wonder if at some point, like, if you're making a loss on these boxes constantly and you can make the money elsewhere, like, why continue? Unless you've got something fresh and some new idea to bring to the table.
Well, let's talk about that. But before we talk about Xbox's new hardware plans, I want to remind you that this episode of the FlipScreen Games podcast is brought to you by our Patreon producers for the month of February. They are, of course, Arnold J. Rimmer, Christopher Valens, Earth Visitor, Gabriel Hasselmeyer, a.k.a. Sobe, Snackago, Steve Stompy, Susan Likes Cats and also Boobies, Ty the Dude, and Wakahula. Thank you all so much for your support over on patreon.com/FlipScreenGames. You're all the reals to the real, and we greatly appreciate your support of this and all of our sister shows. Remember, if you want to get involved, show your support like they did, or keep the conversation rolling between episodes over on our Discord, you can find links to all that and much more over on flipscreen.games. That's our website where you can find all the ways you can get involved in the community or show your support for the show. However you choose to do so, thanks for tuning in for a extra episode this week. We really appreciate you. So, let's pull this quote from Xbox President Sarah Bond, who said that the next Xbox, the next generation Xbox, will deliver, quote, the largest technical leap that we've seen from them. So she said, we've got more to come. There's some exciting stuff coming out in hardware that we're going to share this holiday. We're also invested in the next generation roadmap. What we're really focused on there is delivering the largest technical leap you will have ever seen in a hardware generation, which makes it better for players and better for creators and the visions that they're building. So
Thanks, Sarah. We know quite a lot about that, thanks to you leaking your own documents to the FTC.
It's pretty great. And then in the interview with The Verge that Phil did, he talked about it a little bit more, and he teased the idea that they are thinking about different kinds of hardware, right, than just a box. And he said, I'm very proud of the work that the hardware team is doing, not only for this year, but also into the future. We're really thinking about creating hardware that sells to gamers because of the unique aspects of the hardware. It's kind of an unleashing of the creative capability of our hardware team that I'm really excited about. So this, I think, is interesting. And there's a other bit of it that I want to read in a second about the handhelds and stuff. But I think this is interesting because I think this is something where I could see how you create a differentiation, but also I think it reinforces the idea of something you and I have talked about, I think on last week's show, right? Of my argument of the best exclusives are made with the hardware in mind, right? Something like Tears of the Kingdom, Breath of the Wild, and the way that those intimately are part of the Switch, right? And that they're great on handheld, they're great on the TV. There are big, long, hour-long dungeons that you might want to sit and play on your television, and then there's little tiny bite-sized stuff that you could do while you're on the road. Like that influences how that game was built, right? Or like you look at something like The Last of Us Part 2 and like the level of technology that they are able to achieve because they're only focused on one piece of hardware and they can really, really get in that nitty gritty, right? You look at this, it's interesting to me. Is like, what could Xbox do to create a unique angle that is exclusive to their device? But then again, what does that mean, right? Because I think when you're talking about we want to create hardware that sells because of the unique aspects of the hardware. If you're not making exclusive content for your box, if it has a unique element, then no one is. That's not how that works, right? That comes back to the exclusive conversation as well. You could put all kinds of funky, cool things in the box, but if nobody takes advantage of them, then it won't matter that it has those cool differentiators. And you're not going to get third-party developers to develop specific features for your game, for your console, when you're number 3.
So I think they don't need to be exclusive to take advantage of those features. They could take advantage of certain features and say the game plays best on Xbox while it's still being multi-platform. And I want to jump back to that FTC leak. So they, in that document, spoke about a cohesive hybrid compute and that their vision was to develop a next-generation hybrid game platform capable of leveraging the combined power of client and cloud to deliver deeper immersion and entirely new classes of game experiences. Optimized for real-time gameplay and creators, we will enable new levels of performance beyond capabilities of the client hardware alone. Now, we'd heard all that before. I think Crackdown was what they were talking about, but it seems like this maybe is coming to fruition. They've also got that game they're working on with Kojima, and he seemed to be excited about it. And in the document, they spoke about potentially going down the route of it being an ARM-based system rather than x64 like the current consoles are. So that would be a big differentiator if PlayStation continued to be x64 and Xbox shifted to ARM. But they also talk about having a neural processing unit, so it can do machine learning things on the actual device, similar to like an NVIDIA GPU would have like CUDA cores. And that they've got graphics innovations in here, such as next-gen DirectX ray tracing, dynamic global illumination, micro polygon rendering optimizations, machine learning-based super resolution, and an extensibility model for faster iteration. So I think they are looking to do something different than maybe what PlayStation has been doing in the past, which is just let's do the same again. Like this generation has been the same as last generation, just more powerful with a faster SSD, things like that. And then they're also looking to develop a thin OS so that they can make a sub $99 consumer or handheld device. So that would likely be a streaming stick that they couldn't do this generation.
Right. Which, I mean, to me is like that sounds like the PlayStation Portal, which We were all
To
real
some
excited about that,
extent,
right?
but like the PlayStation Portal doesn't connect to the cloud. I can't stream games from that system. I think maybe when this comes out in 2028, 2030, whenever
With
that may
Xbox
be.
cloud gaming continuing to evolve, right?
Exactly. And we've got 5G everywhere, and I can just connect it and I can play my games wherever I am. That
I
would
don't know.
be an appealing device.
We've been saying that we're gonna have 5G everywhere for the
Yeah,
last 4 years, and it ain't
I
happening.
know.
So I don't know, guys, but we'll see. Um, so he did talk a little bit about the handheld stuff as well, and he said we see a lot of opportunity in different types of devices, and we'll share specifics on our future hardware plans as soon as we're ready. That was in an Xbox blog post that went up today. And the Verge article mentions how there have been a lot of rumors about an Xbox handheld. Spencer has been like liking people's tweets that are talking about one. And he said, I'm a big fan of handhelds. I'm a big fan, but nothing to announce. He says that there's a lot of work to be done on the Windows side of handheld PCs. And he said, this is the thing he said, one of the weak points in the experience on an ROG or the Lenovo Legion Go is Windows, right? So this could be
I'm
a
sure the
part of that
Windows
larger.
team within Microsoft was very, very happy to hear that.
Yeah, well, he doesn't have to say anything now because now that they owned acquire Activision Blizzard, they're the biggest part of the company, so he's the big dog now. So he doesn't have to care. But to me, that's interesting because like we've talked about that on the Steam Deck podcast about like can you get an Xbox handheld eventually? There was that like code like jam thing that we talked about a couple
Yeah, yeah,
months
the
ago where like
handheld mode, yeah.
handheld mode for Windows is seemingly in active development, right?
They should just call
So
it Xbox mode, like, and bring up the Xbox interface and
yeah,
like it
I mean they
boots
have the
into that.
Xbox game
Yeah,
what's
it's
it
not
called?
very
Like
good though, like the
you
app.
know what I mean? But
Mhm,
like that, you could build on that, and that could be the thing where like you launch with an Xbox OS and it's not Windows, it is like Xbox
mhm.
gaming mode, right, or whatever. And maybe you could run Windows on it if you want to, but it has that kind of Xbox mode, like the way you use big picture mode on Steam as like a default or whatever. I think that could be really interesting for sure. But I think it's weird, man, because I think when you talk about something like that, that's fine, right? Like I think there's a real opportunity for them to break into handhelds in some way and like harness the power of Game Pass. Maybe it is just through the cloud and like that eventually becomes viable enough that you can just hook it up and use it. I think we're probably pretty far away from that actually being like a good experience that you'd want to have and that you would like consider it as an alternative to something more traditional. But that doesn't mean anything, right? Like, okay, I felt that way about Game Pass when it started. So, like, fine, maybe it's 5 years away, and then it's a really cool thing when that drops. And same with the TV app and all these other ideas that they have had gestating that maybe will finally come to fruition. But when you talk about, the stuff that you were talking about with like those differentiators, I don't know, man. Like, I think unless it's a thing that's easy for developers to take advantage of, I don't know that any of that's going to matter if they're not making unique software for it that does take advantage of it. Because, like what you're talking about is like, it's all great, but unless it's all, service side, Xbox side stuff that you can kind of just like opt into, if it takes extra effort and extra
Mhm.
work for you to do, people are not going to do it because there's no benefit. You
I
would,
think
you
I
would
think
make,
that they need to partner with the engines. So if you partner
yeah,
with Epic for Unreal or with Unity, and you say let's bring this in, so that people can tick on DirectX ray tracing or dynamic
right.
global illumination, and it takes advantage of that hardware side rather than it needing to be done in the software.
Because
I
that would be
think that's
something.
when it can really kind of
Yeah.
be an advantage for them.
Yeah, yeah, because then it's an easy thing of just you port your game to our platform and we can promise it'll be the best version of it. That's
Yeah.
interesting then. That's where I think you got something. But I think when you're looking at it in the context of like Phil's quote, it sounds like he's thinking about something else. Like he's thinking about like something more akin to like motion controls on the Wii, right? Or where it's like that's a unique thing. But I mean, he could just be using that language to be vague, and it is just
I think
talking
it
about
probably is
better
that, yeah.
performance.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to see them do like a Switch style thing that is powerful, but I don't know that that's unique anymore. That's been
No.
done.
Yeah, like that's the thing is like I think they need to have something that is, different and like I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know what that looks like. I really don't. And I I mean, I hope that they have something up their sleeves that is interesting and dynamic, because, you know, I feel like there's been so much interesting movement at Xbox these last couple of years. Like, I think I said offline the other day that they're my favorite of the three to report on, just because they're always doing weird stuff. But it's like, I just
Or
feel like
buying something.
yeah, right. I just feel like those things have not materialized yet, right? We still haven't gotten to a point where all these decisions and all this investment and all this talk about the future, and there was that thing that people were just talking about this week about like the Power World demo and them having it on every screen, and Xbox is going to be everywhere, and it's like,
Well, they spoke
I
about that in
see
the
that.
podcast specifically, actually, about
Right.
Power
Yeah.
World. And the host was asking, are you really looking for another Minecraft or another Power World when you're putting these games onto other platforms? Or is that what you're looking for, just to kind of keep exclusive? Because obviously, Minecraft is a multi platform game that's owned by
Mhm.
Microsoft
Totally.
and is extremely successful on pretty much every platform it's on. It's one of the biggest
Right.
games in the world.
It's also, I think the thing is though, right? They bought it after it already was that, and that's where Xbox has struggled. They're really good at
They've
acquiring things
really
that are
kind of
already successful.
grown it though. Like they've grown it into having its own marketplace and ecosystem. They
Sure.
completely rewrote it with Bedrock Edition. They're constantly
Yeah.
adding new things. They've taken that IP and made Minecraft Legends,
Yeah.
Minecraft Story
They've
Mode.
been really good stewards of that IP, no question. But I think there is that, like, they've still not been able to spin something like that up themselves, right?
Hmm.
All of their biggest, most successful things are things they bought from other people. And I think Minecraft is kind of the one example where it's gotten better over time rather than it's kind of lost its luster. Like, we look at Halo and Gears and these Forza, I guess, is another one that's been,
Yeah,
upward
yeah,
trajectory.
yeah.
But again, it's like there's a lot more examples of them buying things and then it kind of just like being another feather in their cap, and like, cool, they own Rare, but it's like, is anything Rare's done since they bought it as cool as Rare was back in the day? Like,
I think Sea
not.
of Thieves kind of gets there, and I do think the next game that they were working on looked pretty
Yeah.
good. Like I think
And then it
Xbox.
went away and they haven't talked about it in 4 years because
Yeah, I mean
it's struggling.
that was one of those announcements to hire people. It wasn't really
Yeah.
a game
Yeah.
announcement. But I do think Phil's genuine when he says that he just wants the teams to make the games that they want to make, and that's how we ended up with a Pentiment and a Hi-Fi Rush from these
Yes.
studios that traditionally didn't do those kind of games. And so if Rare did want to make Sea of Thieves, and that was the game and the idea they had, and they wanted to kind of build that, then good on Microsoft for letting them do that.
Right. And to me, like, that's the biggest thing is, like, I think what is exciting about Microsoft as a company, if they continue to do things right, or if they start, depending on who you're asking, I don't know.
I thought this was going to be Microsoft's year. That's what you predicted. This is going to be
I thought so. I thought so too. I don't know anymore, man. But I look at it and it's like they have this lion's war chest of money, right? And like, they buy these really awesome creative studios and then they just give them a blank check to make cool shit. Like, that sounds great. What Phil's saying here to me is a little concerning, that he's like, oh, well, now we need to bring the multi-platform so they make more money so we can justify investing in them in the future. And we can and it's like, okay, like, that's, I guess, where I get nervous when you talk about this Xbox stuff. Is like, they have all these plans and it's like, but where do they go? Right? Like, what has been the result of those plans? And it feels like a lot of bluster and a lot of grandstanding and a lot of, this is going to be the best year in Xbox. And it's just like, we're not there yet. And I believe we can get there, but I don't know. It's an interesting time right now. I think the industry is in a really major state of flux, and the next few years are probably going to see a lot of shuffling of things changing, and whether that's, these platform holders like losing market share or finding new market share or whatever, right? Like, us finding out that AAA gaming is unsustainable and we need to pare it back. Like, I think these are all things we're going to have to come to grips with. And it's clear that Microsoft, like, sees that the tides are turning and they're trying to get ahead of it so they can ride the wave. And I think if it ends up working out, we might be 10 years from now and PlayStation's gone and they're on top. Who knows? But you look at it right now and it's like, it all seems very volatile.
Yeah, I mean, even PlayStation did though, right? Like they had that last year. They put out what one big game, right? So did Xbox. But we had that whole blow up of live service games, the canceling of the Last of Us game that they'd only announced the year prior with Jeff's Summer Game Fest.
Right.
So that was embarrassing. The CEO's out the door with kind of no explanation, no announcement. You never heard from him again. It was just like, bye, he's gone. We don't even know who the CEO is at the moment. They haven't picked one. We just keep hearing from Hiroki Totoki, who works for Sony and doesn't technically work for PlayStation. So we don't really know what's going on over there either. Like they don't seem to have any kind of vision or even leadership at the moment. At least with Xbox, we've got a fresh leadership team. I love Sarah Bond. I'm glad that she's the president of Xbox. I believe in her. I believe that she loves the brand and the console and the fans, and she loves video games. I believe that Phil loves video games. I never believed Jim Ryan loved video games. I think he was a businessman. He didn't care
He's
about
just a
it.
suit. He's just a
Yeah.
suit.
And so
Totally.
I have always trusted that Xbox is in safe hands. I think they've just struggled to kind of turn the ship quick enough. They've not been able to kind of turn the tide and be like, okay, let's get all these new games out. Let's kind of push them out. I think COVID probably didn't help them. I think that probably delayed a lot of games and launching
all
a
these
new console.
acquisitions, dude. Like they've been spending so much effort on acquiring people that they can't even fucking get their house in order.
Yeah, and then those acquisitions put out dud games that, like Redfall, that didn't turn out in the way anyone would have expected or hoped, and didn't have the
And even
quality that
Starfield,
Xbox
right?
needs.
Like it didn't meet expectations. You and I really liked it, but it wasn't a 10 out of 10. It wasn't a game of the generation.
No.
It wasn't a must play. It was a pretty good game in a year full of really fucking good games.
And then they miss out on the game of the year until the Game Awards, like actual day, because of some weird kind of feature parity across a console that can't run it very well. It's just like that was a whole mess as well. So I think there's been faux pas across both Xbox and PlayStation. It seems to be Nintendo that's out there just doing their own thing and is seemingly able to just like print money.
I mean, here's my thing, and this is a podcast for another day, but I've been thinking about this a lot lately, is, you were talking about the thing about like AAA gaming needing to become cheaper, right? So that it can be more sustainable. I mean, look at Nintendo. They put out a game of the year on hardware that is 7 years old, and it was old when it came out, the hardware. And they put out a game of the year that sold for $70, and it didn't cost, I'm sure it didn't cost $250,000 or $1 million to make, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure it didn't cost.
We got no clue, but I can't imagine it would. No.
Probably not, right? It's using old assets. It was in development for 6 years, sure, but I mean, you know what I mean?
Like you got to pay actors, mocap,
all that shit
in there.
Yeah. All of that is way cheaper. So it's like you look at that and it's like, okay, so what are we doing? Like, do games need to look that way? Do they need to cost this much? They need to take, it's like, I don't think so.
I don't think they need to be as long as they are either. Like, seriously.
Yeah. Right. Like, I think almost every game could be shorter. And granted,
what happened to the DLC strategy?
So
but the DLC strategy went out the window. It used to be
people don't play DLC. That's why.
No, I know. Yeah,
they don't play it.
It used to be such a good strategy to like put the game out, you make the money up on the season pass or the DLC. That disappeared.
That's why you got to make the 0.5 game, right? You got to make the Miles Moraleses, because those make fucking money. They make a lot of money. That's what you got to do, man.
Yeah, but I don't think you can do something like that with Starfield. They are going down the expansion DLC route. I don't know how successful that's going to be for them. But that is something that's really worked for Microsoft in terms of revenue, because you get the base game, but any DLC you buy, you're buying that out of pocket. And you can kind of choose, if you kind of really get into a game like I did with Forza, I bought the expansions. They cost me like half the price of the base game.
Bro, they got like $30 for me from buying. I was buying fucking DLC for Dragon Age Origins and Dragon Age 2 on my new Microsoft account. I'm like, this game's like 20 years old. I'm buying DLC for it.
It's the way to go. And like, obviously with Activision Blizzard's games now coming, with like the first game being Diablo, we've got a lot of games to come. I think Call of Duty coming day and date to Game Pass is only going to be good for them. I don't think that this is the doom and gloom that people thought it was going to be.
No, I don't think so either. I think it's just more like, what is the fucking strategy is more my thing. It's not that I think that they're in trouble. It's more like, okay, Xbox is going to be everywhere, right? And it's like, fine, but how long is that going to take before it's actually
they've been saying that for years, right?
for
Like
so long? And it's
everyone's
not.
everyone's reporting that as if it's like something fresh and something new, but I swear, like they've literally been talking about that for
Phil
like
mentioned
a
that. He read off
decade.
4 different taglines they've had that all mean the same fucking thing, which is play everywhere, play everywhere. It's like, great, but I can't, and we're not. So like, that's my concern, you know? It's like, when is enough enough? Like, how long is it going to be before Microsoft, the parent company, gets antsy that we're spending $70 billion on Activision Blizzard and we're still in number 3, right? And I don't know, maybe it doesn't matter because those games are going to print money and their
Also
profitability is
bumps
going
their
to.
stock price up. They closed that acquisition Blizzard thing, and their stock price went shot
Yeah.
right up.
So who knows, right? Like maybe it is just gamers like thinking about this shit too much, and that like what we're looking at here is a strategy they're going to try and we're going to see what happens, right? And that's all there is to it. But I think this is probably a harbinger of things to come. I think you're probably right that more and more stuff is going to go multi-platform, at least for Xbox, because I think they are accepting that they can't win, right? And that they're not going to close ground. But I don't know, because I mean, you look at the PlayStation 3 and they caught back up, right? And it was software and it was cutting prices and it was.
That's, I think, the thing. Like, the problem is at the moment, the two consoles are the same price. They're like going toe to toe. It's the same hardware.
Yeah.
But PlayStation's got your existing library
Like, to me,
and your friends list.
I look at that though, like I look at what PlayStation did with the PS3. I look at like what Sega did all the way back with the Genesis, right? Like I think if Xbox really cared about being more in this fucking fight, they could be. They could drop the price of their console and have a competitive advantage financially. That
Just
it's
give
like
the console away. Be like, you buy a year Game Pass, 2-year Game Pass subscription, or a year Game Pass subscription, you get a console. You're like
yeah.
locked in.
And it's like I think if they really cared about closing ground, they could try stuff like that, and you could see what happens. And it's just like they're like, oh yeah, we can't catch up, and it's like I just don't know that that's true. I don't
You
know
don't
that
know
they're
how far
trying that
behind
hard.
they are, though. We have no idea what their sales figures
Yeah,
are. We know what
we
PlayStation's are because they report them. And if you're not reporting your sales figures, they're probably not very good.
we have an idea. There was just a report recently. I forget gen consoles sold, and we know how many PlayStation sold, so we can do the math and figure it out. And it's like I believe it's like a third as successful, which is really rough.
Yeah.
But it's like, do you mean I don't know. It's a conversation for another day, I guess. We'll leave it there for now. Thank you guys for joining us here in another episode of the FlipScreen Games podcast. This is a very special one. We're trying to get this out as soon as possible, so there's no intro or outro. So I'm just going to say thank you again to our Patreon supporters. Thank you again for tuning in to an extra episode of the show, and we'll see you next week for another episode of the FlipScreen Games podcast. I've been Pete. He's been Steve. We'll see you next week.